The Strait of Malacca is approaching its physical capacity limit. In 2024, annual transits reached an estimated 94,500 vessels. This volume forces ultra-large carriers to navigate with dangerously low safety margins. The average underkeel clearance in the Singapore Strait has deteriorated to just 2.1 meters. This structural bottleneck is driven by a doubling of deep draft transits since 2016. Fully laden vessels now operate near the absolute physical floor of the channel. A single grounding incident in this corridor would disrupt over 1/4 of global maritime trade. Consequently, shipping operators must evaluate alternative pathways through the Indonesian archipelago. Bypassing the Malacca Strait requires routing through either the Sunda or Lombok Straits. The Sunda Strait is highly constrained by a shallow 20-meter depth and complex seafloor topography. This leaves the Lombok Strait as the only viable deep draft alternative. Lombok offers an unrestricted depth of over 150 meters, easily accommodating 400,000 deadweight ton carriers. However, this route imposes a severe geographic penalty. Diverting through Lombok adds 1,600 nautical miles to a voyage from the Middle East to East Asia. This detour extends transit times by 4.5 days at 15 knots. Furthermore, these alternative passages lack the robust bunkering and maintenance infrastructure of Singapore. The geographical detour of the Lombok route translates directly into severe economic and environmental costs. Rerouting a single very large crude carrier increases fuel consumption by 180 metric tons of fuel. This adds $117,000 in direct bunker costs per voyage. Total direct voyage costs rise by over 26%. The 4.5-day delay adds $180,000 in charter costs under standard market rates. Additionally, carbon dioxide emissions rise by 561 metric tons per transit. This logistical friction structurally elevates the marginal cost of global energy transport. The global supply of scandium is highly consolidated and structurally inelastic. In 2023, global production of scandium oxide reached approximately 31.0 metric tons. China controlled over 74% of this primary extraction, recovering it as a byproduct of titanium dioxide processing. Russia produced 18% from uranium and iron ore tailings. This leaves Western nations with less than 8% of global extraction capacity. Furthermore, converting this oxide into high-purity metal is a near-total Chinese monopoly. Over 90% of global metallization capacity is located within Chinese industrial zones. This concentration presents a severe single-source vulnerability for Western aerospace and defense industries. Scandium is a critical enabler for next-generation solid oxide fuel cells. Utilizing scandium-stabilized zirconia as an electrolyte allows the system to operate at 650 degrees Celsius instead of the traditional 800 degrees. At this lower temperature, the scandium-stabilized electrolyte matches the ionic conductivity of conventional materials. This thermal reduction decreases the degradation rate of metallic interconnects by up to 50%. As a result, operational lifespan doubles from 40,000 to over 80,000 hours. Lower temperatures also permit the substitution of expensive nickel-based superalloys with cheaper ferritic stainless steel. This shift reduces stack manufacturing costs by up to 25%. Commercial scaling of these fuel cells is threatened by severe economic friction. Global demand for scandium oxide has grown at an annual rate of nearly 13% since 2016. This demand is driven by fuel cell commercialization and aerospace alloy production. However, inelastic supply has forced prices up to $4,100 per kilogram. A standard 100 kilowatt fuel cell stack requires up to 2 kilograms of scandium oxide. At current price levels, raw material costs threaten the economic viability of the technology. Without domestic extraction and refining capacity, Western energy transition plans remain highly vulnerable to this concentrated supply chain. Western efforts to secure rare earth supply chains are failing at the midstream transformation phase. While ex-China oxide separation capacity expanded to 16,000 metric tons in 2024, corresponding metallization capacity stalled at just 2,000 tons. This creates a severe structural mismatch. China maintains a near-total monopoly, controlling 55,000 tons of metallization capacity. Consequently, 87.5% of Western separated oxides must be shipped to Chinese facilities for reduction. This circular dependency invalidates upstream mining independence. The metallization bottleneck is sustained by high capital barriers and severe environmental liabilities. Converting Neodymium-Praseodymium oxide into metallic alloy requires high-temperature molten salt electrolysis operating continuously above 1,000 degrees Celsius. This process demands $25,000 of capital expenditure per annual ton of capacity. It also generates highly corrosive fluorine gas and hazardous anode slimes. These toxic waste streams present near insurmountable environmental permitting hurdles in Western jurisdictions. Consequently, China's global capacity share peaks at 90% during this specific metallurgical phase. Downstream magnet manufacturing cannot achieve independence without resolving this midstream choke point. Global demand for sintered magnets is projected to reach 285 kilotons by 2026. Western sintering capacity will expand to only 30 kilotons, meeting less than 11% of this demand. Meanwhile, China's capacity will reach 300 kilotons. Even if Western sintering plants scale further, their operations remain entirely dependent on Chinese precursor alloys. The entire Western electric vehicle and wind turbine supply chain remains tethered to Chinese industrial policy. The semiconductor supply chain is structurally vulnerable to upstream agricultural chemical production and regional energy pricing. Ammonia synthesis yields approximately 1.2 to 1.4 metric tons of crude carbon dioxide per ton of ammonia. Consequently, fertilizer plant curtailments directly dictate industrial gas availability. During the 2022 European energy crisis, natural gas prices peaked above €120 per megawatt-hour. This price spike forced a 55% reduction in regional ammonia capacity utilization. The regional crude carbon dioxide feedstock supply contracted by 42%. Alternative sources like bioethanol fermentation and petrochemical off-gases account for less than 25% of global high-purity refining feedstock. These alternatives cannot offset fertilizer-linked deficits. This leaves advanced manufacturing exposed to volatile agricultural economics. Grading crude carbon dioxide to electronic-grade purity requires specialized cryogenic distillation and catalytic oxidation. This process must restrict critical impurities to less than 1 part per million. The physical and capital constraints of this purification process prevent rapid supply-side responses. Lead times for purification machinery extended from 10 months in 2020 to 24 months in 2023. This delay stalled capacity additions as global demand surged. By 2024, the structural deficit in refined capacity reached an estimated 1,300 metric tons. This deficit directly threatens dry etching and supercritical cleaning steps in advanced logic fabrication. Newly constructed semiconductor facilities face operational delays due to this localized gas shortage. The bottleneck highlights how high-technology manufacturing remains tethered to slow-moving industrial infrastructure. The supply chain for military-grade tantalum capacitors is structurally decoupled. Central African nations control 62.0% of raw mining, but possess 0.0% of refining capacity. Instead, high-purity chemical processing is concentrated within just 3 corporate entities. China controls 38.0% of this capacity, followed by Germany and Japan at 32.0%, and the United States at 25.0%. This extreme consolidation means 100% of Western defense electronics rely on a highly vulnerable midstream bottleneck. A single disruption at any of these facilities halts the production of advanced military hardware. Increased global munitions consumption has exposed this structural inelasticity. Lead times for high-charge military-grade tantalum powder escalated from 16.0 weeks in 2019 to 58.0 weeks in 2024. This represents a procurement delay increase of over 262%. Conversely, standard commercial-grade lead times have normalized to 16.5 weeks. This divergence proves the bottleneck is highly isolated to high-performance defense specifications. The delay directly threatens production schedules for precision-guided weapons and active electronically scanned array radars. The underlying bottleneck is physical and chemical. Processing yields collapse from 88.5% for commercial grades to just 28.0% for ultra-high-charge space-grade powders. This yield drop drives exponential cost increases. Military avionics-grade powder costs $950 per kilogram, compared to just $220 for commercial grades. The extreme complexity of double sodium reduction and thermal deoxidation prevents new market entrants from scaling. Consequently, the Western defense industrial base remains locked into a highly inelastic, single-source supply chain. Lithium-ion battery scaling is fundamentally constrained by specialized mechanical engineering capacity rather than raw material synthesis. A highly consolidated duopoly controls the production of high-width biaxial stretching lines. Japan's Shibora Machine and Germany's Bruckner Maschinenbau command over 80% of the global market. This machinery is highly complex, requiring extreme precision to stretch polymer films down to single-digit micrometer thicknesses without tearing. Consequently, equipment procurement lead times have surged from 12 months in 2018 to 32 months in 2024. A standard separator production line with an annual capacity of 100 million square meters requires up to $35 million in capital expenditure. Equipment delivery now represents the primary critical path delay for global gigafactory projects. Transition to ultra-high molecular weight polyethylene is a thermodynamic necessity for high-energy density cells. Increasing the polymer molecular weight to 4.5 million grams per mol allows manufacturers to reduce membrane thickness to just 5 micrometers. This transition simultaneously increases puncture resistance to 640 gram force. Thinner membranes allow for higher active material loading, directly increasing cell-level energy density. Furthermore, high molecular weight polymers exhibit superior thermal stability. Shrinkage at 130 degrees Celsius drops to 0.8%, preventing localized short circuits. The safety margin between thermal shutdown and mechanical meltdown widens to 41 degrees Celsius. This provides a critical operational buffer for battery management systems to mitigate thermal propagation. Geopolitical concentration remains a structural vulnerability for Western supply chains. China is projected to maintain over 75% of global wet process separator capacity through 2028. This dominance is sustained by rapid domestic equipment integration and lower capital costs. Despite aggressive subsidies like the United States Inflation Reduction Act, Western capacity additions remain severely delayed. By 2026, North American and European production combined will meet less than 14% of localized gigafactory demand. This structural deficit forces continued reliance on Asian supply chains. The bottleneck is compounded by 30-month lead times for Japanese and European stretching machinery. This creates a multi-year lag between battery factory commissioning and domestic component sourcing. The primary material phase of the global electronics industry is highly concentrated. Over the past decade, North American commercial autoclave capacity declined by 96%. By the end of 2024, only a single operational unit with an inner diameter greater than 300 millimeters remained in service. Meanwhile, China expanded its share of global autoclave capacity to 73.3%. This consolidation leaves Western supply chains entirely dependent on foreign hydrothermal synthesis. Rebuilding domestic capacity is constrained by high capital barriers. A single high-pressure autoclave system requires $4.2 million in capital expenditure. Manufacturing and safety certification require up to 24 months of lead time. High-reliability electronics require precise physical and chemical parameters that cannot be bypassed. Space and military-grade quartz demands a mechanical Q factor of at least 3 million. This performance level restricts the crystal growth rate to 0.4 millimeters per day or less. This slow growth rate forces an autoclave cycle of 75 days. Accelerating the growth rate to 1.0 millimeters per day reduces cycle times to 30 days, but degrades the Q factor to 1.8 million. This degradation is caused by increased structural hydroxyl impurities. These defects increase infrared absorption and compromise long-term frequency stability. High-performance defense systems cannot tolerate these physical trade-offs. Physical limits of quartz synthesis have created a chronic supply deficit for advanced systems. Lead times for high-reliability, space-qualified quartz resonators peaked at 52 weeks in 2022. They remain severely elevated at 42 weeks in 2024. The structural supply deficit for these critical components persists at 12%. This bottleneck is driven by the total absence of domestic Western autoclave capacity. Solid-state silicon alternatives are readily available but technically non-viable. They exhibit a phase noise floor that is 20 to 30 decibels higher than quartz at 10 MHz. This performance gap renders them useless for military radar and satellite communications. The global transition to utility-scale renewable energy is stalling at the transmission interface. High-voltage direct current systems are required to integrate remote generation, but the supply chain cannot scale. Between 2018 and 2024, the global active project pipeline expanded from 45 gigawatts to 152 gigawatts. This 237% surge has overwhelmed equipment manufacturers. Average procurement lead times for converter stations have escalated from 18.5 months to 46.5 months. Over 65 gigawatts of planned transmission capacity is now structurally delayed. This backlog is driven by a physical deficit in high-power semiconductor manufacturing. Global demand for Thyristor valves crossed the maximum effective production capacity threshold in late 2021. By 2026, this deficit is projected to reach 10,000 wafer-equivalent units. Production remains highly consolidated, with 3 conglomerates controlling over 85% of global assembly. The primary constraint is the availability of ultra-pure float-zone monocrystalline silicon. Scaling this material requires specialized crystal pulling machinery with lead times exceeding 24 months. Deconstructing the converter station reveals that delays are concentrated in highly specialized subsystems. Converter transformers and Thyristor valves represent the most severe bottlenecks. Together, these two components constitute over 50.5% of total capital expenditure. Their lead times have expanded by up to 183% since 2020. Additionally, control systems face delays due to shortages of specialized microcontrollers and field-programmable gate arrays. This multi-layered component deficit prevents rapid grid modernization.